Yeah,
Practical.
yeah, I don't know. This is irrelevant to what we have here. But okay, what you want to talk about rationality, and the different ways to talk about rationality. I have seen some of them. They go like this. We have different conceptions of rationality. For example, we have rationality in science. We have rationality in, religious science, in theology, in blah, blah, blah. I think the whole methodology is to introduce different conceptions of rationality in terms of the domain in which rationality is used. This is one way. I'm not sure this is the right way. I'm not convinced, at least. Because you say, for example, this is the reason for... Okay, this is rationality in ordinary life. Call it practical rationality. This is rationality in holy sciences. And this is rationality in natural sciences. And this is rationality in social sciences. Well, you can do that. But I'm not sure that this kind of categorization gives you genuine distinctions. I do not see how this kind of distinction shows us what's going on in the nature of rationality. Do we use the same methods? Do we use the same ideas, just applied in different contexts? Or no, we are using different methods, we are using different concepts. I'm not sure that just the categorization gives us this much. The other way you can talk about rationality is to say, okay, sometimes rationality gives you absolute certainty. Sometimes rationality gives you, certainty, it's not absolute certainty, but you are certain. Sometimes rationality gives you kind of a status like belief, but not so robust. And sometimes other cases. I have seen such distinctions. According to the second approach, it seems that you are talking about different kinds of rationality just by talking about different psychological results that you get. I have seen this phrase in Arabic. Al-aqlu بمعنى ما. Okay, I do not recall that. But something like, sometimes aql is associated with tuma'anine. You're right. Sometimes we talk about rationality this way. Sometimes it's not associated with, certainty in a different sense. I'm not sure even certainty stands as a good translation for tuma'anine. Yeah, I would like to learn about this. How this shows us genuine distinction, or is it aim? Is it what? Okay, is the distinction is the distinction that we make about rationality that rationality gives us different psychological status, different forms of rationality gives us different forms of psychological results? Is this an attempt to unpack the concept of rationality? It might not be. It might be a different. It might be a different thing. We do that for a different purpose. I'm not sure. So I do not talk about that approach or these approach to rationality. Perhaps you have talked about that. I don't know. So coming back to my talk. So maximizing utility, I feel that is a kind of broadening the concept of goal from self-interest to utility, and then because utility has more objective flavor, let's say, then you can add more than just pure psychological matters. Yeah, go ahead.
I guess what distinguishes this approach from, let's say, Islamic perspectives on rationality is that, I guess, in the religious sense, whenever you think of rationality, the specter of the law is always behind it, and how rationality creates, how discourses on rationality create prerequisites or a discursive space for legal concepts to emerge and a legal reality to regulate society. And I guess what's always eaten me with this kind of discourse on rationality is that the law is implicit but never really made explicit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, or the translatability of this discourse into law is not necessarily at the forefront of what these intellectuals want to be doing or want to be referring to. If that makes sense.
Okay, good. Yeah. Dr. Crow, do you want to add to that? Just
Sure, I follow Ezra. I don't know why the law would have to interfere in one's rational activity beyond a certain point, of course, when it comes perhaps to contravening accepted doctrine or practice. Couldn't one just observe the law and then pursue one's rational activities as a theologian or a scientist or a moralist? I mean, would the law be a kind of dictator? I mean, I don't follow what you're trying to say.
That's law, but legal philosophy. And thinking, not necessarily law, but thinking conceptually about the law. As we've seen in the previous days, a lot of the discourses on rationality lead into usul al-fiqh. Whereas here that is not made as explicit.
And to press Karim's point, is this a description of what has happened, or is analysis that you see that there's a distinction between rationality in this context and rationality, I don't know, in another context?
That's what you asked.
Yeah.
What's the difference between how you see this discourse in light of what we deal with in philosophy of religion and philosophy of law?
And so
this is not. It's not to make any objection.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to understand the point. So your point, so Ezra's point is that rationality in this context, if I'm wrong, please correct me. Rationality in this context does not pay attention to legal philosophy, so to speak. But rationality in moral, religious context, when we talk about rationality, is somehow, perhaps we don't know how, but somehow tied up with conceptions of law.
Correct.
And rules.
Either law and rules on the one hand, or we've discussed how the intellect and rationality is perceived in terms of understanding God and substance, the substance of rationality, first, second, third, in the Neoplatonic sense. So it's either law or understanding the nature of divinity and emanation from divinity and reaching the divine intellect as men through philosophical epistemology.
Okay, anyone else wants to contribute? So do you see these conceptions as, I don't know, how do you see the relationship between, if there are two conceptions, how do you see the relationship between these? Are they just two terms, two different meanings, or no, they share a bit or share a lot, or they are the same exactly? No? Any comment?
Just in general, I mean, utility and self-interest have always been central to understanding rationality in the past and today, of course. In his book, Mahiyat al-Aql, Al-Muhasibi, one of the earliest books written specifically on the intelligence in Islam, one of the main features in his definition is ma yanfa wa ma yadur, what gives benefit and what gives harm. So that intelligence allows one to choose what is beneficial and to avoid what is harmful. Well, that's a kind of self-interest. It's also a kind of utility. What in the modern discussion, all this idea of rationality is a method or a tool or a process, and when they talk about self-interest or goals, basic goals, what is the self that's involved? And do they discuss the reason principle itself? Or is rationality, the process, what they're focusing on, and they don't get into the discussion of what is reason itself? For example, Professor Awani gave us an interesting overview of intelligence and intellect, in which he insisted that in Islamic thought, aql has an ontological function and a cosmological function. And I don't think those ideas would enter anywhere into this discussion according to what you've said so far. How would we connect it to that idea that the reason principle in man has somehow a link to the cosmos and a link to our highest levels of being? That's what we're told by the people who have come here to explain to us what intellect and intelligence mean in Islam. They've often repeated that. Professor Pazuki, Professor Awani, and this is a theme we've now heard now. Am I correct? So now this is a completely different perspective. Are they interested in reason itself? And do they question who is the self, who's being provided the interests of? Or that's not on the table in this discussion?
Yeah.
Basically. Short answers, best answers. No, I don't know. Well, I haven't seen a discussion. Okay, the last point you mentioned, that the dominant theme that you referred to is that, what was that? Could you please repeat that? The dominant idea that you...
utility and self-interest are basic to rationality, and that intelligent people do what is good for them and avoid what is bad for them.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're intelligent and you've burned your hand in the fire, you won't put it in again, right? But if you're not intelligent, you might continue to burn your hand in the fire because you don't know how to avoid what's harmful. I mean, that's a basic feature of intelligence. If you have a child who doesn't know how to stop doing things that are harming them, you wonder about how intelligent they are.
Yeah, and then the one that in Islamic context you talked about, that people said that in Islamic context rationality is...
Well, I was just repeating what our lecturers have very stressed, that the reason in itself has a cosmic aspect in terms of its relation to the soul of the human, and has something to do with realizing the full potential of human being, so that it has an ontological aspect. Now, of course, that's a very general statement, but are these discussions, are they concerned with that aspect of reason, or that doesn't enter into their minds?
Yeah.
As moderns, good moderns wouldn't think like that, would they?
Yeah, okay, what to say. I haven't seen discussion about nature of self in the context of rationality, in the sense of the ontological sense, that self is kind of substance, self occupies a particular status, ontological status, and fulfilling all its potentials is the main item of rationality, main item in rationality. Okay, I haven't seen that, but I'm not sure I can say in virtue of that these are ignorant and cannot grasp that concept. This is perhaps one way it came to my mind right now. It depends what they call utility. If perhaps they call utility, if utility is something wider than what is within my boundary, if utility at the end of the day, my utility is linked somehow to a wider environment in a very, very broad sense, then maximizing utility perhaps has something about what's going on in the world. Maximizing utility has an external dimension, external to myself. So one step after that would be to say, well, depending on the, if for example, I'm not sure Planting Guy shares this or not, but it sounds to me like somewhere Planting Guy has said that Resurrection Day determines rationality of some of our actions today. In one sense, I think Plantinga's view, if I'm right in recalling Plantinga's view, correct, that is someone, I guess he's Plantinga. If this picture is right, I think this is not, the conception of rationality in this picture is not far away from maximizing utility. Different from the standard conception, agree, but not far away, because you have a broader ontology, you have a broader word, which includes Resurrection Day. You have more links to this broader ontology, and your utility is somehow, even your own utility, is somehow linked to all these broader contexts.
If myself is my physical organism and its needs and desires, I want to drive a car, so I don't care if the pollution is choking the planet. Yeah. I can go from here to there, and maybe I can include my loved ones so that we can go. But if someone says, but if you really understand where your best interests are and who your true self is, you would love nature and the earth, and you would be concerned about the fact that the planet is suffering and dying and will not sustain itself, and that your great-grandchildren may not live in a healthy environment. So you should think of yourself in a bigger way. Well, it's like what Islam was teaching these tribal Arabs, that, yourself is not you and your tribe. It's you as a creature of God and as part of humanity. That was a big change for people. It was difficult for them to understand, because they were used to thinking of me and my fellow tribesmen and my blood kinsmen. And to get beyond that thinking was a big struggle for the Muslim community in the beginning. We don't understand how difficult it was. Tribalism is one of the strongest inclusive, exclusive features in human social organization. But that's what the religions usually try to expand self. They don't want to narrow self. And maybe modern period has reverted to a kind of narrower view of self. I don't know. They always say, one feature of modernity, individuality, self-promotion. I remember my neighbor in Lebanon, may God rest his soul in peace, he used to say, I love you, but I love myself more. But he was saying a true thing. I mean, he has to take care of his own best interests first in order to help other people's self-interests as well. So we have to have a healthy self-interest, but it can't be selfish, if you will. It can't be isolated. It has to be in terms of our whole group. We're social animals. We would like the whole human race to benefit, to have benefit and utility and well-being. We have to think like that, otherwise it becomes what they said, a war of,
all against all.
It's not a very healthy, it's a Hobbesian situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. So can I conclude this way, that it seems that conception of maximizing utility can be taken in different ways depending on your worldview about utility, self, and self-interest. It can be taken in different ways, in the sense that you can take ontological perspective, you can take epistemological perspective, and some of these discussions, I agree that in the recent literature, is somehow, suppressed by naturalism. Naturalism as a dominant ideology of modern world. I believe that this is not just about rationality itself and utility. It's about everything. It's about truth. It's about, I think, this is my guess, let's just take it as personal views. I think this is something that happens with modern ideology of naturalism, that even philosophy now comes to find a new form. And perhaps the dissatisfaction of people like Nasr and others about analytic philosophy and the way they approach philosophical problems is just one aspect of that is just the overshadow of naturalism over everything else. And this might happen in theories of rationality too, and I think it happened. Okay, so more about utility I have here, but I'm not sure I want to tell them. I want to tell you about them. So I put aside discussion about the relationship between utility and preference and option if we want to come back to them at question and answer. Okay, now another conception of rationality. Within the utility maximizing perspective, people came to realize that perhaps we are mistaken. The first thing is this. Whatever is utility in self, the structure of rationality as understood in terms of instrumental rationality, maximizing utility, is this. Focus on an agent. You as an agent want to perform an act. The act has some possible outcomes. Therefore, you have some possible scenarios. You consider all possible scenarios. Then you have a criterion of, I don't know, utility, whatever it is. Use that. For example, self-interest, whatever. Compare all these different hypotheses, different scenarios. Calculate which one maximizes whatever criterion you have. And then you choose that one. Whatever you choose is rational. This is the mechanism. Okay. The first problem with this approach is that do people really survey options at the start of a decision problem? Do ever people consider all possible circumstances, actions, and possible outcomes, then start thinking, okay, such and such is rational, calculating, and then picking the one with the highest expected value? The first problem is, at the first stage, people do not do that. People do not consider all possible outcomes. People do not consider all possible ways of performing something. People are more, people are different. Let's not say what people are. People are different. People are not like that. So, one thing is that even in cases in which our conception of utility and self are as narrow as naturalism suggests, do we follow this kind of rationality or not? And this became a salient question in the last 3 decades. That perhaps we are mistaken for centuries, even about this narrow conception of rationality. The most prominent work is by Herbert Simon, Models of Bounded Rationality. The idea is this. We do not aim at maximizing, ever in the narrow context. This is not the goal. We do not want to maximize utility, self-interest, happiness, well-being. This is not the way we work. This is not the way that we reason. We hope and we aim at satisfactory things. We aim at an action. We aim at something that satisfies some requirements. You see that the picture is now becoming different. In maximizing model, you take something as the gist of rationality and you try to maximize that with whatever calculus you have. In this new model, you do not aim at maximizing. You have some goals, you have some concerns, you have some preferences, but somehow you limit them to a narrow a domain, and then you pick one that satisfies you. Satisfies you in the sense that the requirements are fulfilled. Okay, still we will not see the difference. Now a new term comes into play, satisficing. Okay, satisficing in Simon's language is not satisfying nor maximizing. Satisficing is adopting the first satisfactory option discovered. Okay, so Simon thinks that, okay, one, we have made many mistakes in understanding rationality. One is that we have thought that the function is to maximize. It's not, it satisfies. It's to satisfy. The second is this. We have attempted to find rules. He calls them substantive rules. Substantive rules that tell us which decision maximizes utility. He thinks we should find not substantial rules, rather procedural rules. Procedural rules are different from substantial rules in the sense that they do not tell you about the decision. They tell you about how to make the decision. In different language, roughly speaking, procedural rules are conditional. Substantive rules are not. This is just a rough picture, because in some cases the conditional distinction does not accord with procedural, non-procedural, substantial rules. So instead of talking about rules to make this, to have right decision, you should talk about rules to know how to make the right decision. Instead of maximizing your expected utility, you should satisfy whatever you look for. And satisficing means finding the satisfactory option in the most effective way. As you see, in satisficing, you have the term discovered. Discovering something is something as an actual flavor. It depends on your research method what you discovered first. It depends on your circumstances. It depends on many other things. Discovering something is something contingent. Okay, so now you see that elements of contingency, conditionality, and other things lurk into the standard conception of rationality. And this is new kind of rationality, procedural rationality. So in the sense that you are not looking for substantive rationality anymore. This kind of rationality is practical in two important senses. First, that the aspiration levels adjust the difficulty of finding a satisfactory option. So you adjust yourself in context with what you want. And the search procedure determines which satisfactory option emerges first. As you see, the conception of procedural rationality is still within instrumental rationality. It's still within instrumental rationality. However, it seems to offer a new method for getting the goal. There's a book by Robinstein, Modeling Bounded Rationality. He thinks that even we should expand procedural rationality to our inferential capacity. Even when we're doing logic, pure logic thing, okay. Even in this case, we are using models which look like models of bounded thinking.